Thank you very much for being here. This is the first time we're going to make this presentation, and I'm very excited that before this group of practitioners that have been involved with small businesses and or the Latino community for a long time. And this is going to take about 30 to 40 minutes, but I really look forward to the discussion we're going to have later on, and to listen to your comments and suggestions that you may have. And as Sol said, this is we tried as much as we can to get perspective from local residents and people working here, but we're still outsiders, so you're the ones who are working, have been working with these issues, and so we really look forward to having this conversation and to inspire more people to get involved in the initiatives that you have been working already. So this is part of larger initiative that the Boston Fed started about 4 years ago now, that we have entitled To Our More Prosperous Springfield. And why the Boston Fed and why Springfield? Well, Springfield has one of the highest poverty rates in New England, but also a lot of the issues that affect Springfield are similar to other older industrial cities. So we think that by trying to better understand what issues are important in Springfield, we can replicate those lessons in other cities across New England and really across the United States. Our support has been focused on lower income communities and how these communities can be integrated to efforts that the city is already undertaking to revitalize the city. So this is just part of this effort. Now, why, again, trying to switch gears towards small businesses? Well, Springfield, as you know, has a very low employment rate, and this is defined as the ratio of employed people over total working age population. Of course, part of this is because unemployment is really high, jobs are not available, but another striking thing of this composition in Springfield is that the labor force participation is really low, and it's even lower in neighborhoods with high concentration of Latino population. In some of these neighborhoods, less than half of working age population belongs to the labor force. So a lot of working age population is not even looking for jobs. So not only that jobs might not be available, it's just that they are either discouraged or tired of looking for jobs, or something that we don't know or we don't understand. So in previous papers, we have looked at jobs that are located in the city and what types of jobs that Springfield residents are working on. Now we look at this other alternative that might be a good one for lower income residents in Springfield. And I say might because that's how we started this project. We didn't want to say, yes, small businesses is a good alternative, we should invest in small businesses. Let's see if being an entrepreneur is really a good option for this community. So that's how we approach this issue. Why try to concentrate on Latino population? Well, as you all know, this is a growing population, especially in Springfield. I think according to the 2010 census, it's getting closer to 40%. So I think it's important to pay attention to this community in particular. A lot of things shared by this minority population, which soon will not be minority anymore, is the same as African Americans small businesses are facing. So we think that some of these lessons can be applied to others. Others definitely are very particular to a Latino population. So if I speak here, can you still record it?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So we want to understand how important is the role of Latinos small businesses in Springfield, then try to get at what are the major barriers that small business owners face, and finally try to provide some public policy recommendations. The paper that it's already in its final draft, and we'll make sure all of them get the final paper when it's ready. It's organized in 4 sections. First, we conduct a brief literature review, looking at the factors that motivate entrepreneurship in general, not just in Springfield. This is from empirical papers, most of them. The elements that explain gaps between whites and Latinos and whites and blacks in terms of self-employment rates and also of outcomes of small businesses. And finally, is really entrepreneurship a good way for minorities and lower income population? So what are the effects of entrepreneurship on income and on upward mobility? So that's the literature review. But then we conduct an empirical research looking at all the data available at the city level that has some data or some information on small businesses or entrepreneurship. There's a lot of information out there if you really have a large sample. So Kaufman Foundation has great resources, but then when you get at the city level or at the neighborhood level, you lose all that. Even the census data is not enough to work at this level. So we try to get all the pieces together and put that in this report. And I understand that sometimes we jump from one to the other, but it's because we try to put everything that is available out there. So we looked at self-employment from the census primarily, and also at the data from the survey of business owners, the minority business ownership rates. Then we look at the small businesses located in Springfield. And finally, we conduct interviews to small business owners in Springfield. And I'll talk briefly about that in this presentation. So why do people want to become entrepreneurs and have their small businesses? So there are several factors, and a combination of all of them might be the reason why one chooses to have their own business instead of going to the wage and salary sector. This can be divided into the pull and the push factors. So it might be because someone thinks that really being an entrepreneur offers more opportunities than going into the other sector. Or it might be because there's the barriers in the labor market are so high that I don't have another option but to have my own business. And from the literature review that we conducted, there's really no evidence that one is more important than the other. It's really a mix of them. But I think it's important to consider these two issues because depending on the community and depending on the city and depending on the time, one might be more important than the other, and the solutions might be different depending on which one is motivating entrepreneurs. Another interesting fact that I think is important to mention is residential segregation, especially affecting immigrant population. And I know Puerto Ricans are not considered immigrants, but a lot of them face the same issues than other Latino Americans coming to the United States in terms of language and integration and other issues. So residential segregation seems to motivate self-employment, right? Because when population from certain ethnicities concentrated, they are going to demand particular goods and services that can only be provided by their own group. So that stimulates entrepreneurship. But there's research that shows that this is true up to a certain point. When concentration and isolation are too high, then that tends to decrease entrepreneurship rates. So I think this is important, particularly given the structure that neighborhoods have in Springfield. So if you go to the North End, it's really close to downtown, but it is an isolated neighborhood, physically and also I think emotionally. So this might be good, right? Because we can open bodegas and provide goods for Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and others who live in there, but we have to be conscious that these neighborhoods have to be integrated to the city if we want entrepreneurship to grow. Now, is entrepreneurship good in terms of upward mobility and income? Yes and no. Research results are mixed in this area too. But what I found, if I could summarize the research that we've been reading, is that when researchers look at self-employment in general, it seems that self-employment is not such a good idea. So workers who decide to become wage and salary workers experience a higher income and higher growth rate of income in general. But then when you look at studies that go to the details of having by type of education, by income, by race and ethnicity, by male versus female, then the results are a little bit different. And it seems that from what I've been reading, the consensus is that, especially for lower income males who have low education, self-employment is a better option than going into the wage and salary sector. It's little bit different for females. So I thought it was interesting that females who are working, I think I skipped to this. Yeah. Females who are self-employed do better even than white, Latino self-employed women do better than white self-employed women after controlling for education, ethnicity, and other variables. So these are econometric studies that show this. But self-employed workers, Latinas, do better than, do worse than wage and salary Latinas after controlling of all this. So again, solutions for men and for women might be different, and women have other motivations to become self-employed and have more time to stay at home and employ family members. Now let me go back because I think I skipped this slide. So we know that we're not sure what motivates self-employment, but we are sure that the facts, the gap between white self-employment and minority self-employment is large, and it hasn't changed much over time. Gaps in educational attainment, especially among blacks and whites, has been improving over time, but this gap has not changed. So that's a puzzle that people still try to understand. What explains these gaps? Well, there are a couple of things, but again, from most of the research that I've read, all of them cite these factors. Minorities, again, especially blacks and Latinos, have fewer assets. They also have lower educational attainment. The higher the educational attainment, the higher the self-employment rates. And then it's been shown that intergenerational links are a very important factor of determining future self-employment rates. So if by historical rates, blacks and Latinos have low self-employment rates, that is going to self-perpetuate in the future. So one needs direct action if one wants to this gap to improve in the future. And finally, it seems to that there is evidence that there is discrimination in the credit market. There's one study that shows that, and this is from data from the Federal Reserve Bank, that when people apply for loans using credit cards, the gap is not that big. I mean, a credit card, they're not saying or telling what ethnicity they are. But if they go to the usual credit tools where they do say what their ethnicity they are, then you see the gap is much larger. So it seems that this is a factor that is not allowing the gap to be reduced, something that one should take into account too. Now let's look at what the numbers are saying. This is data from the 2000 census, and I know we have much up-to-date data, especially from the American Community Survey, that when I was writing the report, we had data from 2006 to 2008, that was the most recent data, but I decided to use the 2000 data when comparing Springfield to other cities. And that's because the sample size, when we use the American Community Survey data, might be too small, especially if one looks at self-employment rate in a particular city for Latinos. Then the numbers get really slow, and it's really low, and it's really hard to compare these cities. Why are we comparing cities? Well, we can have numbers for Springfield, but if we don't have our references, it's difficult to have a conclusion about is this really high or is this really low. We chose cities that are located in New England and that are similar to Springfield in terms of manufacturing rates, demographic composition, and size. And the way we selected these cities was based on a study that some of you have read or have heard about, that we've called Lessons from Resurgent Cities, where we had a group of 25 cities that were compared to Springfield back in 1960. From those cities, those that are listed here are those that are located in New England. So we think it's a good group to compare Springfield to when we do these types of analysis. So as you can see here, back in 2000, Springfield's self-employment rate was about half of the U.S. rate. So self-employment rate in Springfield was about 3.3%. Compared to other cities, and that's self-employment rate, total self-employment rate. Compared to similar cities, it seems that Latino self-employment rate is not very different to these other comparable cities. So Springfield was doing on average the same as these other cities. Now what I think is interesting to point out is that usually and across the country, Latinos have a higher self-employment rate than blacks. And in Springfield it's true, but it's only slightly higher. If you can see, Latinos are in purple and non-Latino blacks are in green. If you see the United States, for example, the same thing, Latinos in purple, non-Latino blacks in green. The difference between Latinos and non-Latino blacks, it's pretty important. That's not happening in Springfield, so I wonder why is this happening? Is that Latinos have a particularly low self-employment rate, or blacks have a higher than average self-employment rate in Springfield? In any case, it will be important to understand what are the differences between these two minorities and who's doing the right thing. We see that self-employment rate in Springfield really went up very, very fast in the, let's say, in the past 10 years. And of course you might say, of course, the number of self-employed should have gone up because the number of Latinos has increased so much in the city. Well, that's true, but the number of self-employed grew by 2.5. So it was multiplied by 2.5. So 155% of increase in this period of time. Whereas the number of Latinos that worked in the wage and salary sector increased only by 53%. So you see the increase was much, much higher in the self-employment sector. Just as a reference, the total labor force, Latino labor force, increased by 56%. So why, of course, the crisis is part of this, and it's been shown that when a crisis arrives, self-employment increases. Self-employment has increased in this period of time in every city and in the nation as a whole. But when you compare, and again, we should compare Springfield to what the national trend is, the growth in Springfield is much higher than the growth in the United States and the growth in Massachusetts. So it's not just a phenomenon that's happening here, but it seems that entrepreneurship is growing in Springfield more than in other places, despite or because of the crisis, we don't know, but this is a phenomenon that it's important to take into account here. So the last row here shows self-employment rates and the number of self-employed in Springfield. So not only the number of self-employed was multiplied by 2.5, you see here from about 400 to 900, but also the self-employment rate, which divides the number of self-employed by total employed population. So it's not because we don't take into account the unemployed, right? You see that the self-employment rate went from 3.3 to 5.4% in this period of time. So the rate and the number has increased sharply in this period of time. And this was not true for whites. So you see, white self-employment rates actually decreased in this period of time. Now we'll look at the data on firms. So data from self-employment tells you a lot about the demographics, but it doesn't say anything about the type of firm, the size of the firm, the growth of the firm. People who self-report themselves as self-employed might not have an incorporated business. We don't know if they have employees, or we don't have nothing about the firms that the self-employed might or might not have. The survey of business owners, on the contrary, provides data on the characteristics of the firms. A lot of businesses that are on the informal sector, or all of the businesses that are on the informal sector, are not considered in the sample. So that's something that we know and we cannot analyze, but we should take into account when analyzing these numbers. Fortunately, the data from the survey of business owners, 2007 data recently came up. So this was incorporated in our analysis, which I'm very glad it happened, because when I first finished the paper, the latest data that I had was from 2002, and as we will see, that shows a very different picture from Springfield. When we look at the 2007 data, and as you can see in blue on the left, those are the Latino-owned firms as a percent of total firms in these cities in the United States and in Massachusetts. And in green, you can see the share of the population that is Latino. So when you compare Springfield to Massachusetts and the United States, Springfield has about 12% of all firms in Springfield are Latino-owned. That's a much higher rate than in Massachusetts, that it's below 5%. I think it's about 3% in Massachusetts, it's about 8% in the United States, so much higher rate in Springfield. And again, you might say, of course in Springfield this should be happening because you have a much higher share of Latino population. Now let's compare Springfield to cities that have a similar share of Latino population. So if we choose Providence and Hartford, we see that they have a higher share of Latino-owned firms. So when we compare Springfield to other cities that have a very high Latino population, Springfield doesn't seem to be performing as well as we saw with self-employment data, where Springfield was on average the same thing. Now I'm going to show you another chart which shows you exactly that. So what I did here is I took the ratio of Latino-owned firms divided by the share of Latino population. So the lower the bar, the worse is the city in terms of how representative the businesses are in the Latino community compared to the importance of the Latino residents in the population as a whole. So Springfield is, I think there's only one city that has a lower ratio than Springfield. The others are performing better than Springfield. So compared to the amount of Latino population that lives in Springfield, we should have, or expect to have, a higher share of businesses that are Latino owned. So we should work towards having or getting to those averages. And again, these are not cities that are doing great or are the best examples that we should target our policies to get to those cities. Those are cities that are struggling like Springfield is. So if they are doing better in terms of having more Latino-owned businesses, I think Springfield can do better. In general, Latino-owned businesses, not just in Springfield, but in general, they are smaller, they employ, fewer firms employ people, they employ fewer employees, and the sales are lower. That's a characteristic in the nation as a whole. What I thought it was interesting, and if you compare here the numbers, again in red, you see Springfield there, Hispanic-owned firms, only 12% of Hispanic-owned firms have employees, so are employers, compared to 27% of all firms that classifiable. And this means that I'm excluding public firms here, and I'm excluding public firms because first we don't know who owns those firms, and then usually they are much, much larger. So these are not public firms, those are that are on the left. So much higher rate of all firms that employ people compared to Latino-owned firms in Springfield, but also in the United States. And actually I thought it was very interesting to see that more Latino-owned firms employ people in Springfield than in these other cities, and than the US average. So Latino firms are employing people in a slightly higher share than other firms across the nation and in these comparable cities. So this is a good thing. So these firms seems that they are performing better, if one thinks that this is a good thing, because they are generating employment. Now if we look at other outcome measures, for example, the receipts, these are average receipts for these firms, then first again, Hispanic-owned firms earn much less than the other firms. But not only that, the gap between those two is much higher than in the US and than in comparable cities. So we have to work on that. So yes, it seems that they are employing more people, but they are not earning as much as in other places. Now, this is what I mentioned before. If you compare the growth of Latino-owned firms from 97 to 2007, so in those 10 years, the growth in Springfield has been slower than in comparable cities. Now the story is very different if you look at 2002 to 97 to 2002 than if you look at 2002 to 2007. So in the first 5 years, actually the number of Latino-owned firms, again from this source, I know there are a lot of informal businesses that are not here, the actual number of Latino-owned firms declined slightly in these 5 years, which I was very surprised to see when I first was writing the report, and as one of my conclusions were going to be very different from what I'm going to say today. And well, you might say, well, maybe this was happening in other cities and in the state. Well, that wasn't happening in these other cities. These other cities had a growth of 168% of Latino-owned firms in these 5 years. So something happened or didn't happen in Springfield. But then the trend is reversed. From 2002 to 2007, the growth of Latino-owned firms was 10 percentage points higher than the average growth in these other cities. And you will see the difference here. So I tried to show the 3 years for which we have data available, 97, 2002, and 2007. So if you take a look first at 97 and 2002, so Springfield's right there, you see the slight decline. This is the number of firms. This is the percent of Latino-owned firms as a percent of total firms in the cities. So from blue to green, a slight decrease, and then a jump in Springfield. Now, Providence is really interesting. Providence has been growing in terms of Latino-owned businesses since 97, and the growth, the rate of growth is really high. So maybe that's something we should look at. What's happening there? What's happening in neighborhoods? Yes. And the opposite happens from 2002 to 2007. So if you compare Springfield to other cities, the growth in Springfield is much higher, both in terms of percentages and of actual number of firms. So the census has all types of surveys, tools, and samples, and sizes of samples, and the survey of business owners is one of their tools. So they survey business owners. This is not part of the decennial census that looks at residents and has all kinds of data. When I show you the data on self-employed, that's when somebody from the census goes and asks you, do you work or are you self-employed? And you self-report yourself as self-employed. That's data that will be in the 2010 census. That's very similar to the American Community Survey. So say the American Community Survey is a mini census, demographic census, and that's what I showed you before. This is a different source and it's looking at different things. It's looking at firms, not at residents. So it's different. So finally, the final thing we looked at is that small businesses located in the city. This is data, that's another source, from the zip code business patterns data. It doesn't say anything about who owns the firm. So why would I like to look at this data if I don't know who owns the firm? Well, this data is at the zip code level. So I try to look at the neighborhood level, what type of small businesses are located there, just to see how served these communities are. And I focused again on neighborhoods where the share of Latino population is very high. I'm going to skip these two slides. So these three slides that I skipped, that shows you for Springfield as a whole what's the structure of employment in terms of size of establishments. So what's the share of small establishments, but also where the employment is concentrated. That's something that the Pioneer Valley mentioned in their report, and this has more updated information, and it shows you that depending on the industry, how small or big the firms are varies a lot across industries, and also tells you where one has to be concentrated if one wants to focus on small businesses. But I think the interesting part of this report, although the last slides were based on an estimation that we did, we calculated on a different paper, so it has some contribution there. But I think what's interesting from these data is we try to look at zip code level data. We don't have data at the neighborhood level because we don't have data at the census tract or the block level. So we try to match neighborhoods with zip codes, which is not perfect. But the area 2 and area 3 are the areas where we are going to try to spend more time understanding how the business located there are doing. We don't know who owns the firms, but those are the firms that are located in areas 2 and areas 3. And so this is area 2. So the red part where South End is, where downtown is. And so it's downtown's there, right? So I was expecting to see an increase in total establishments. And as you can see, the actual number of establishments located in this area, the red area, has decreased in the last 10 years. And I was very surprised to see that, because how vibrant a city is also reflected in the number of businesses. And the top line is total establishments. The bottom line is tiny small businesses or little businesses with less than 4 employees. That has also decreased in the past 10 years, so from 98 to 2007. So what's happening there, or can the city or the organizations, private and non-profit, do more to increase the actual number of establishments in these neighborhoods that indeed has downtown included in the area? Now, if I look at these same data by industry, again, the only sector that has shown growth in these 10 years in terms of number of establishments is the professional services sector. And 3/4 of those are office of lawyers. So that has increased in Springfield a little bit. The rest, even retail or even healthcare and social assistant number of establishment has decreased over time. And I'm particularly worried about the retail and the accommodation and food services because, again, having a vibrant downtown and a vibrant city implies having more of those services. Now, this is looking at zip code 01107, so that's mostly the North End. I know part of it's not included in the zip code. Again, the number of establishments increased in the beginning, but then decreased since 2004. So there's definitely need for more support or to understand why this is happening in these neighborhoods. Now, okay, so finally we got to the point where we really needed to understand what's the perspective of the Latino-owned businesses. We conducted interviews in November and in December in the North End, 16 acres, Metro Center. You have the neighborhoods there. I have to say most of the business we interviewed were in the North End, both because it's easier to get them, the concentration is higher, and also I tried really hard to get more than one businesses in other neighborhoods. It wasn't as easy as in the North End. The methodology we use by referrals from Latino leaders in the city, but also by snowball sampling, so asking businesses to connect us to other businesses, and then I just went to businesses and walked in, and the people were so nice and open to me and spent time with me even if I didn't have an appointment. So that's the way we chose these neighborhoods, these businesses. I tried to get different type of businesses, so I kind of selected them a little bit. Those businesses included small stores, clothing stores, grocery stores, beauty salons, money transfers, and restaurants. All the interviews were conducted in Spanish. And I think that really helped get the business owner's perspective. There are several categories. When we sent you the paper, you will see the questions that I use as a reference. It wasn't a questionnaire, it was a conversation with the business owner, but those were included in there. All of them said that they wanted to become self-employed or entrepreneurs because they wanted to be their own boss. But also because if you don't have a professional degree, it's really hard to get a job in Springfield. And if you get a job, that job won't pay enough for you to pay your rent and also pay for your children's education. So those were the two reasons that all of them mentioned. The firms that we interviewed had from 1 to 10 employees. They were in business from 1 to 5 to 10 years. All of them employed family members. Most of them employed only family members. I thought it was interesting that several of these businesses bought already existing businesses. So they didn't create a new one, but they bought one that was already in existence there. I think in some cases I asked if the previous owner was Latino, but I don't recall well what the statistics will be, but it seems that they were buying from others that were not necessarily Latinos. None of the entrepreneurs, the 11 businesses that I interviewed, received any kind of technical assistance. I think 2 of them mentioned STIC as a place where you can get free technical assistance. And I think the SBA is also, the SBDC is located here. Yeah. So they were, it wasn't STIC, but it was the SBDC that they were talking about. They knew about it, but they didn't access or didn't want or didn't use it. There was one that came here, got the business plan, but didn't like the business plan. In the end, they didn't use the business plan. So in the end, none of them used technical assistance. All of them finance their businesses with their own resources or family members' resources. There was one who expanded their business using credit cards, but the rest was mostly their own savings. Despite all the problems in the economy, and really, being a business owner is really hard work. Most of them work more than 12 hours a day, and that's why some of the reasons they don't go to technical assistance providers, they don't have time to do that, or to get out of their own business. Despite those problems, it seems to me that businesses have been growing, and they have expanded, and they have added other lines of businesses. So There was a grocery store that now also has a restaurant, a beauty salon that added a barber shop next to the beauty salon, clothing store that now has also money transfer services. So in every case, they are trying to add more things and be very active, very dynamic. I thought it was also very interesting, and again, this last part is consistent to other studies that have interviewed small business owners. They do not want their children to continue in their business if they can. Most of them have their children studying, getting their professional degrees. They know that that will be a better path for them. Why they are not growing their business? The first thing they mention is that demand is very low because of the recession, of course. They complain a lot about not finding adequate space, especially in the North End. Those who are the businesses that are in the plaza, they seem very happy with the way the rent is, with the parking space they have, the way the place is clean. They don't have problems with the landlord. But some of them are doing well and they want to expand. They just don't know where to find that space. It seems that access to credit, it's a very important problem for the very new firms. For the businesses that are started in the past year or two, they did seek credit, they didn't find credit. For those that started 5-10 years ago, maybe the situation was different. They had their own savings, they didn't look for a credit. But for new firms and for expansion, access to credit seems an important problem. It's interesting to see that a lot of them said, most of them, that the crime rates have decreased in the past 5 years. Of course, they would like to see further improvement in that and in cleanliness, but that seems that, as we usually here in Springfield, is it reality or perception? Crime has been improving.
And I think what that indicates is that, you know, out of whatever you hear, the North End is not as violent as, you know, as the city is projected to be, and that's why a lot of those business committees, you know, don't see that as a major issue.
Yes.
In my opinion.
There are a lot of things, right? If you're used to see such high crime rates and then it goes down a little bit, that's a good thing if you don't go to other places. But also maybe the perception of the North End being such a dangerous place that I don't want to go to shop. Maybe that's not that true. Maybe you can go and walk and I think it's important to tell that to people and living in other places. There's this perception of the North End, from my perspective, that I don't want to go there because it's dangerous or because it's not clean. Well, maybe things have changed over time and maybe perception is different and maybe there's a need of a campaign to show that this is happening. And of course improve safety, that's always an important thing. I asked them why you choose to stay in the North End and why you don't go to downtown or other areas. What I heard is that there's a perception that the South End and downtown is a white area, that of course there are a lot of people, but people don't live downtown, so after the offices are closed, there won't be any clients or customers there. Parking is not available, which again, as an outsider, my perception is that I always find parking in Springfield. But most of the business owners told me it's really hard to find parking space, so maybe I should start listening to business owners and believe them. So again, if we want business owners not to be concentrated, maybe there's need to have an explicit effort to provide space in other parts of the city. And there are business owners that don't want to be in the North End anymore, and they explicitly told me, I want a location that's not in the North End, but for them it's really hard to be located there and not have access to services and to customers.
But what kind of businesses are they that want to move?
Restaurants mostly,
Okay.
yes. Most of the Latino owners do not belong to any business association. 2 of them belong to the Latino Chamber of Commerce. 1 wanted to become a member of the Latino Chamber of Commerce. Most of them were not aware of any program for the storefront renovation program, and you know more than I do that those programs are available. They didn't know about them. 1 knew about them, and she said that once these programs get to them, it's too late. They already have done their investments, or they don't have the money to give the down payment for those programs. Something that I like to point out, and I think maybe it's not necessary to point that out in this location, in this seminar or this meeting, is that besides providing employment, Latino business owners are very important in neighborhood revitalization. They provide services and help to Latino residents that you cannot find in the numbers. other actually research has shown that this is true. So they either provide translation services, they connect residents to other service providers, they provide, they sell on credit, fiat. I don't know if it's the real actual translation of the verb fiat in Spanish, which is you sell something, they don't pay you, they pay you when they can. That's sell on credit. I think that's what I found on the internet.
Kind of like layaway? I said that you take the
Lay-
product.
No,
Take
no,
the
it's if you take it with you,
Okay.
you pay later.
Yeah, do you know better word for
I
fiat?
don't think there's a.
Well, that's a great thing. So you go there, you get something, you don't pay, you pay when you can. Even someone told me that once he had to provide transportation to someone who was sick, and I really put this quote there. A business owner told me, "El pan no se niega a nadie," so you cannot deny bread to anybody. So if they are in need, they will do that. It's important to show that this is already also happening. You cannot quantify this. And I'm almost done. So I don't think I have, I don't know, how much time? 5 minutes? 3? 5? So I thought it was important at least to list in the report the programs that are already existing in Springfield, because not because these business owners are not using the programs doesn't mean that Springfield doesn't have them. Again, you know that, but maybe people who will be reading the report will know this. So Develop Springfield has a program. The city, as somebody was explaining to me, has 2 programs. SBA, SBDC, SCORE is here. I don't know. I tried to understand what the composition of the SCORE program is here. It doesn't seem that they have any Latino.
Well, that's one of the challenges SCORE has always had, not only here but everywhere.
Okay.
Finding bilingual people to handle, because one of the problems we have in the Hispanic community is the lack of being able to communicate in English.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm here. I'm bilingual, and that's why the agency asked me to come here, because there is a need here for that. But when you try to counsel people, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Can we, as a point for probably later, but can we put on our list so we don't forget, maybe classes to help train more people in Spanish?
I do those.
Okay.
I do those, yeah. I do those on financing, how to start their own business.
No, for the people like, me. So, because I have Spanish tucked away back somewhere in here from the many years I took it when I was in school, so I can get words, but I can't, converse. I can't help somebody, but it's a really important thing, and there are a lot of people that I would love to have something that fits into my professional day that I could do it better, because, expand the population of bilingual people, basically.
Yeah, it's a catch-22,
Yeah.
because the way SCORE recruits people is by asking either present business owners to come and help, but like you were saying, I'm too busy to do that.
Right.
So
Right. Now, as you said, this mentor, I think that's very important, and it would be great if that happens. But I think SCORE provides role models, right, from what I understand, and mentors. And if that person comes from the Latino community, and I interviewed really small business owners, but they are Latino business owners that have much larger establishments. That I think it will be great that if they are part of this program or other program that can be put together. The Latino Chamber of Commerce, of course, it's in place and it's already there and plays an important role. In the paper, I described these programs and I tried to understand why Latinos are not connected to them. I don't mean to do that today, especially because we don't have time, and these programs. From the business owner's perspective, why, if all these resources are available, they are not accessing it? Well, sometimes it's because they don't have the matching funds to match the programs that some of the storefront programs loans have. There's a lack of awareness that these resources are available. There's a perception that the application process is really hard. Is it true or not? But that's a perception sometimes. Where these programs are located is important, again, because they don't have time to go there. And language barrier is also an important thing. And I look forward to what you think about that. Now, if we can get some recommendations, we think that it's very important to, if microfinance is available or these programs are available, it's important to have a local partner that understands the specific needs of the Latino community, and even better if it's located in these neighborhoods. These entrepreneurs have to actively be contacted directly. They won't go to the resources. I think the resources have to go to them if we want wants this to improve. The city plays an essential role. They already have programs for most businesses, but they also play an important role in investing in safety, in cleanliness, and in having adequate commercial space. I don't know if the private sector or the public sector should be doing that, but it seems that there are not enough spaces for expansion of business owners. I think also we think that business owners need to collaborate further, and also there's no guide to. There's almost an oversupply of certain types of businesses, a lot of beauty salons, a lot of bodegas, and business owners are feeling that oversupply and pressuring on prices, and there's no way to either have a conversation or guide new entrepreneurs on what businesses are really needed in these communities. And I don't know what would be the best way to do that. There are some organizations in Jamaica Plain in Boston that actually do that. They tell them, okay, there are enough of these businesses, try this. Each person knows what to do best, but they can at least give them some advice.
Do you, on that one, is that, when they say that, when you said that the business owners say that there's this price pressure kind of thing because there are a lot of bodegas,
Mm-hmm.
is that based on their own gut feel or is that based on data?
Oh, I think, for example, the beauty salon example, I think it's really easy to see for them how prices have gone down. Actually, the owner of that beauty salon said, if I had to open a business now, I wouldn't open a beauty salon because there are so many of them. And she told me how prices have gone down. I don't remember how much it was. And she said, I will open a liquor store because that's what gives money. But then it's very hard to get a liquor store. But do we really want more liquor stores? So she was very smart. She invested her own money. She seemed she worked really hard. She knew how to get the permitting process, and her beauty salon was really nice. And she's getting people from other places, but she doesn't want that anymore because she sees so many beauty salons. In the bodegas, I think it's interesting. In some cases, it might be because that's what's there, but in other cases, it might be because business owners really like owning a bodega. And in that case, it's good. If you want that business, that's your decision, right? But others, I think, you want something. You want a business. Help trying to figure out what will be good.
So I have another question. So you looked at a lot of retail. You talked to a lot of retail businesses. And, some of the businesses that, I'm trying to kind of bring into the incubator are not necessarily retail, but are more commercial, B2B, business to business kind of thing as opposed to retail.
Yeah.
Can you remark to that? Because that might be a growth area for the Latino community and the community beyond to do the B2B as opposed to the B2C.
That's a great question. And also I didn't include services in general or contractors, which I think is a very important part, in part because it was difficult to find them. But
well, I think, when I think of growth, as you noted, the B2C is limited because then you're restricted to your geographic area and you eventually hit a cap in terms of what you can get to. But when you're B2B, you can branch, you can export basically, and you can begin to sell outside of your region, and then your business can actually grow. And that's kind of where I begin to use the word enterprise as opposed to small, the really tiny small business.
now, how do you get them to that point? They might need even more support, right, to understand what that means, and also I think these firms are using suppliers, most of them from New York, suppliers that were already existing. They are not pooling resources, so if they could pool those resources and buy big lots of things and then sell to other businesses, I think that would be a huge improvement. But again, I don't think they'll come up, that you need support to do that and the tools. But that's a great point.
Is the Federal Reserve in a position to help us identify those needed businesses?
That's a great question, because part of an idea that I have is do a business assessment, needs assessment survey to see what businesses are needed in the community. I don't know if we're going to get to that point. But there are others, like the Wellspring Initiative, that are working on the cooperative model to see if that would work and provide services to actually big employers that Springfield has. And that those employers are interested in working with small businesses, so there is opportunity for that. We, as Sol will mention later, we are happy to get any requests that you think we can work on with our research capacity, because what we can do is limited, right? But for now, I think we are not yet there.
What percentage of the firms that you interviewed were in that plaza in the North End?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
If they are located,
What percentage of the firms
were
were
in
in
the
the
plaza?
plaza?
So in the plaza, I think I interviewed 3 of them. 2 more in the North End were not in the plaza, but I walked the entire street in the North End.
So they were all in the North End?
So most of them were in the North End. I think 5 of them were in the North End, most of them in the plaza. And because they were in the plaza, I decided I shouldn't present this report without trying to get businesses that are not in the plaza. Because the plaza has parking space, the plaza has, they clean so that's different issues. But I did get more information. Okay, finally, I think some of these things I've already said. This is not from my interviews, this is from the actual research that others have done. It's important to differentiate, and Marla, that's also getting into what you were saying, the type of business owner. The needs are different, the type of technical assistance is different. So for our corporate business owners, maybe getting a large loan, it's important. For small business owners, trying, of course, give them access to capital, but also connect them to resources that are available is important. Again, this is from literature research and others that have researched on this. It's very important not to stop on the providing direct services to these businesses. The gaps, as you saw before, are caused by other things like low educational attainment, lower assets. There are a lot of new innovations in asset building. I think this individual development accounts, I love that tool. I actually wanted to put much more on this report. Maybe we will investigate further on that. Because as you see, Latino business owners want to invest their own money, their own savings. So maybe they won't get a loan, but if the city or an organization can establish these individual development accounts, they can have their own savings and then use that for their business or their business growth. And as you know, this implies that someone will be matching. So if the business owner puts $1 in their savings account, then an organization puts another $1, and after 1 year they have the amount to invest. And they don't need to think that I'm taking a credit, I'm using my own money. First-time home ownership programs and such. And I just wanted to show you this slide of other papers that have already been published by the Boston Fed as part of this initiative. All of that is available online, and you can also subscribe on the mailing list, and I'm going to be sending you emails when something new shows up. Thank you very much, and thank you for your questions.